Hi, this is LB Bryant here with CT, and we're going to be doing another episode of Expanding Horizons. For those of you who aren't aware of what this show is, basically the logic is that between him and I, we've watched a lot of anime over the years, but not everybody can watch everything that's ever come out, and there are gaps in our database. So what we're doing is referring each other, recommending a show to each other that the other person has never seen, going off for a month to watch it, or longer, and coming back and discussing what we saw. So today we are going to be discussing two shows. We're going to be discussing Coyote Ragtime Show and Outlaw Star, two sci-fi series from 10 and 20 years ago, respectively. So we'll go ahead. We'll start with Coyote Ragtime Show. So before we begin with a discussion, CT, can you give us a brief overview of what this series is about?
Before we go into that, is the subtitle of this podcast going to be Reducing Your Pile of Shame? Or is that just sort of the hidden subtitle?
A little bit of both.
Okay. So yeah, Coyote Ragtime Show. Amusingly, that was a show that I had kept passing by. In the list. I would see it, I would see the cover of it, and I'd be interested mainly because of the name of it, but I just never got around to watching it. So it also doesn't seem to be one that's talked about too much in the community, so
No, this is one of those shows that really flew under the radar when it was first released by ADV back in like 2008, and then it got re-released by Funimation, but even then it really flew under the radar.
And the funny thing, one thing that I didn't know going in was that this is, early Ufotable. This feels kind of like the show that actually is like, oh, okay, we're starting to see the quality that they would be known for later, at least as far as animation itself goes. Because I think they did stuff like Ninja Nonsense before. That's not really a thing. That's like, ooh, hey, high quality Sakuga. Although I will say this doesn't have nearly enough particle effects for me to recognize it as a Ufotable show. But if it came out later when they'd started to make a name, I think people would, have been much more apt to watch it and be part of a conversation, if just when they're talking about the studio in general. But it feels a little bit like the before times. So into the description of the show, however, both of these shows are kind of competing for the who gets to be, most like Firefly, sort of. It's obviously Coyote Ragtime Show had more to follow up on, even in anime, because of shows like Cowboy Bebop and Outlaw Star. But they definitely have that ragtag, misfit space adventure family feel to it. So in this case, we start with what is it? We start actually from the perspective of a Federation Bureau investigator called Angelica chasing a wanted criminal, a criminal mastermind known as Mr. A great name.
Yeah, I actually kind of like that they didn't give him this big grandiose name, and that he's just Mr.
Exactly. And so, well, all of them have nicknames in it largely, but because Bishop and Katana, it's not like you feel like those are real names that they're running by. But yeah, it doesn't swing really towards criminal mastermind, Mr. Maybe if he had an X after it, Mr. X, then then people would be like, oh, now he's mysterious. But she is on the trail to find him. She has been on his trail for, what is it, 4 years, 5 years, more?
I think 5 years.
Okay. A number of years she's been chasing him, and she finds him what she believes to be that he has, what is it? He has been imprisoned, but is planning on breaking out. We don't know why. She doesn't know why. He's serving a particular sentence at a place, so she's going to try to locate it. It feels like he still needs to be brought to justice, even though he's in prison and serving a sentence. I'm not sure I quite got how all of that worked, but so that's where things start, and things go very rapidly crazy as we learn the details of his breaking out of prison. The folks in his gang who assist in breaking him out, who's chasing him, who he needs to find and protect, and what they're after. And ultimately, what they are chasing is the treasure of the legendary Dread Pirate Roberts. Wait, no, he's Pirate King Bruce. An old companion, compadre, one might say a coyote. But of course, a pirate who was killed years ago by Madame Marciano, leaving behind his young daughter. So Mr. is breaking out of prison to find Franca, the Pirate King's daughter, and then go in search of the treasure. One doesn't really know if it's for him, for them, for her, but that is what's going on. So we meet them in the middle of a prison heist, as it were, and then we get to basically watch them being chased all over the galaxy while they try to figure out where the treasure has been hidden and how to get to it. And while everyone else in the galaxy, all of the pirates, all of the law enforcement, are on their trail. That is the basics. There is, of course, a lot more to the action, but it's a fairly simple structure to it.
So you watched this a little while ago, because we've been trying to record this podcast for weeks now.
It's been a bit. It's a little bit hazy.
Yeah. So, but did you have any? What did you overall think of it? Did you enjoy it? Do you remember not enjoying it? Not as good as you were hoping for?
Overall, once I got to the point of being able to, hindbrain it, it was enjoyable enough. I almost pulled the veto on episode 1 because when the setup included them getting attacked by essentially a pack of robot gothic Lolita chicks, I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not quite sure I follow these structures together. Marciano was one thing, but the 12 sisters, who you were very quickly introduced to, and the head of one of them they travel with, as it were, it's very fucking weird.
See, now you're hurting my feelings, because the 12 android gothic Lolita assassin sisters were like one of my favorite parts of the entire series.
Well, it's the kind of thing I feel that either it immediately gets you into it or it immediately gets you out of it. For me, it just kind of kept me a little bit too disconnected from it until I got to a certain point that it settled in. But that it just kind of pushed the I'm sitting there, I'm waiting for a heist thing, a prison break thing, another thing. Obviously, it's over the top. Obviously, you have the buxom Federation Bureau investigator Angelica who's chasing after him, and the even more buxom complete ditz Chelsea who she picks up along the way. And I'm like, okay, we're not taking a whole lot seriously here. But there's sort of a limit to the explosion of how much non-serious you're supposed to get right away. And the 12 sisters parachuting in and then the reveal that basically they're huge murder machines, unstoppable Terminators, but of course they are, kind of moe goth lollies. It throws you off.
Yeah, I can see that point, but yeah, what I still remember very clearly when I watched this series, I was one of the few people who watched it as it was being released via DVD singles.
Oh.
I even still have the steel art case that ADV released way back when with Volume 1. So yeah, but I remember watching this when it first came out, and I really dug on the 12 Sisters. I can't remember. Well, to be fair,
They
this
do have a
was
particular
like,
appeal to them.
yeah, to be fair, this was like 2008, so a good, what, 11 years ago?
Yeah, I guess it was broadcast in 2006, but it would have taken ADV a few years to get the DVDs out, probably.
Yeah, so this was still back before simulcasting was a thing, so.
And how long were you watching anime by that point?
By that point, I had been watching anime for about 6 to 8 years.
Okay. So a wee baby, you were still in your elementary schooler phase.
Yeah, I was still in that era where, a lot of things were really eye-catching to me. I don't know how many series I had watched by that time. I know that I had been writing about anime for 3 years at that point.
Right, so you're pretty well inundated as well, inured in the in everything that's going on. For me, I'm sure this would have been. I think it would have picked up much more interestingly if I was still in sort of the pickup phase when there was a lot of ridiculous sci-fi going on, and I was largely watching with my friends, and we'd pick up some random show, and then we'd train back into Chinatown and grab a whole bunch of tapes of the rest of the show that was out and another show, and we'd do that week by week, month by month. So this would have fit right in there. I'm not quite sure how well it fits in with things at this point. Even Outlaw Star, which I also rewatched for this, it comes across a little jankier than I remember.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a few minutes. But yeah, Coyote Ragtime Show, I haven't rewatched it in a while. When I recommended it to you, I think mostly it was nostalgia.
Sure.
When I saw that you hadn't seen it, and it was like, okay, you know what? If I'm going to watch Outlaw Star, then you need to watch some kind of
Well, no,
semi-classic sci-fi
you
yourself.
my recommendations. I gave you two choices based on your giving me Coyote Ragtime Show. So yours
Yeah.
came first, and then I'm like, okay, and we'll talk about that later. But mine was definitely shaped by yours.
Okay.
So Coyote
Okay.
Ragtime Show didn't have that. So far, my recommendations have always come after yours. We can decide if we want to reverse that for the next episode.
Okay. We'll keep that in mind.
But
So, all right. But so basically, this seems to consensus is that the series had its moment, but kind of missed the opportunity and when it was first released, and hasn't really aged well, in your opinion. Would you say that's accurate?
That's accurate. I'm not sure any shows of this type are the aged well sort of thing. I mean, if either of these shows got a new run on Toonami, Outlaw Star did back in the day. That's why it was a community staple and is still well known. But even that, I don't see people, recommending people go back to. There's a lot more, a lot better, and it's a lot harder to keep up with anything these days. So yeah, they seem to be in the mists of general forgetfulness, and probably doesn't age well. I think Outlaw Star might have done a little better being a single core like Coyote Ragtime show.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the very least, Coyote Ragtime show could keep more focus on what it was doing, even if there was, a bunch of gallivanting about. It seemed to be all towards the purpose.
Anything else about Coyote Ragtime Show that stood out to you, either good or bad? Any other major moments that you particularly liked or disliked?
Well, one that I was predicting from the very beginning was I assumed Angelica was Mister's daughter because you had that daughter, father-daughter connection between Mister and Franca, even though he's not hers; he was her surrogate. Felt he owed it to Bruce or the Pirate King Bruce. So it felt kind of like the whole setup felt like he was doing a making up with Franca for his failures as a father before. That was my prediction the whole time. And I don't know if it was disappointing or refreshing that wasn't the case at the end. Because I'm just busy waiting for that reveal the whole time, and it sort of colored their interactions. But the funny thing is, when you do find out at the end that it's not the case, then it's almost, the anime is almost implying that there could be a romantic relationship at that point in some fashion between Mister and Angelica. And I'm like, okay, no, that's worse. Let's steer far away from that. And thankfully they didn't go down too far, but they were playing when they were in the what was it, the van being chased by folks traveling over the desert while he was racing to get to the treasure and save the planet and all that jazz. There were scenes that started to play out that I'm like, okay, now it's a little creepy. But it turns kind of back into, like not the prisoner, the, oh God, what's the one-armed man? What am I thinking of?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I just can't place a name.
The fugitive. So it feels like it'll turn into that. They have their happy-go-lucky pirate family. They've made off in the end with enough treasure to at least have more gallivanting adventures. She'll go chasing after him in the future. So it's sort of that happy stasis that they get through by the end. They get the treasure. They triumph over Marciano and the 12 sisters. Most of them, I guess, got killed by the end. There are plenty of fatalities in this.
Yeah.
Not much on our good guy side, but they I at some point I was waiting for Mister to be revealed also as a cyborg of some sort, because the number of times he gets shot and just pulls through by grit and duct tape, and then goes into the next scene to stand off in a fight with a cyborg. It's like, dude, this guy is a little bit robust. But I guess that's what makes him a criminal mastermind.
Yeah, he definitely comes across as probably a lot tougher than he should have been. But I I remember kind of digging on that and thinking that it was kind of cool that he was such a tough guy. Again, it's been a while since I've watched this, so I can't guarantee that I would feel the same way if I rewatched it tonight.
Yeah,
Um,
well, it's shonen-y, so you always assume that they're gonna pull through and do that, and it's not terribly serious. You don't expect it to be fatal. The bad guys get wiped out bit by bit, but our good guys, maybe you'd suffer the sole casualty to put some stakes into it somewhere, or have a little bit of a slight downer sort of ending. But nah, in the end, they just manage to get through everything constantly by the skin of their teeth.
yeah, and honestly, another thing that I'm thinking back on this series, I remember for a long time I was really bummed that it didn't get a second season. But looking back on it, I'm actually now kind of glad it never got a second season because it would have been just too much.
Yeah, it does seem like there's not a whole lot to them. We'll probably talk about that a little later, because I that's sort of something I wanted to bring up about the particular ending of Outlaw Star as well, for these kinds of shows and things that sort of speak like they're promising continuing adventures, and then you never get them, and it's like, do we want it? Do we not want it? But we'll get to that when we can discuss both shows at the same time.
Yeah. So, any other final thoughts on Coyote Ragtime Show?
I'm trying to remember particular things. I think my enjoyment of the heist aspect of it, where they were training, and it very much had, your kind of heist breakout scenario. They were making big copies of, here's the giant safe. The amount of ridiculous that rotational dodecahedron safe was took me out of it a little bit. I would have liked something a little bit more, Thomas Crown affair, because criminal mastermind doesn't necessarily mean, okay, we have a copy of the safe, and apparently it involves a whole lot of athleticism and explosives rather than cleverness. This feels like something that I think would have been a lot more interesting if they'd done it in the fashion of excuse me, of the tricking people, but giving you something where we know just enough to be interested in it, but then they pull off moves at the end that actually surprise and delight us with it. That to me speaks more criminal mastermind, but this of course speaks more high flying shonen anime adventure. You have a ticking clock of an entire world going to be nuked. That's one thing I also couldn't really wrap my head around, was the whatever this kind of Graceland didn't seem to be a threat to the thing, anything around it. They weren't threatening anyone. They were blockaded in by whatever Federation forces were doing it. I forget if they were called Federation or not at this point, but they're still just discussing nuking the whole planet anyway. And I'm like, wow, but how is this the solution? They're not threatening you. They're not doing anything. You're not having some, sneak attack where you have to destroy their homeworld to prevent the threat. You literally have them at your mercy, and you are discussing raising the planet down. So that adds the ticking time to how they need to get to the treasure before the planet is blown up. But man, that's just not working for me. That particular threat to it, I'm like, but no, that's horrifying. We should spend the next court discussing the political fallout of what you guys were considering. But again,
Yeah,
you have
I mean,
that. That's where you have to take the 12 Sisters Gothic Lolita robot thing and just shove everything far back. Shove it away. Do not think about this. But yeah, that would take me out of it as well, because they added stakes to it that were just, again, way too damn ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
And then,
So, all right, let's go ahead. Let's move along to Outlaw Star. Uh,
okay,
I, I
before
purposely. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
before we get to there, I think we need to have a mini conversation, because one of the stipulations that we had was that, you could make recommendations, but then, we could annul them and pick another series. And as I recall, I did not immediately say, okay, here's a space adventure for you. Right?
No, I
We
believe you
started with
recommend. Yeah, you recommended one other series to me that I vetoed after a little while. I don't remember what it was.
it was an origami.
Oh, right. Okay, Noragami. Yeah, I tried with that one. And it was a series that I had tried to watch once before, and I sort of remembered liking it well enough, so I was willing to go along and try and finish it. And it just did not work for me. I got through about half the first season.
Okay, so like 6 episodes.
Yeah, and it was just not jiving with me. So that's when I pulled the veto button.
What was there anything in particular about it, or it just wasn't? It was just a general shrug that meant you weren't invested enough to want to continue with it.
I think it was more a general shrug. It was just I could not get through. I just couldn't get through it. I don't remember specifically if there was something about it that I really just hated, or something that turned me off entirely. It was just not working for me.
Did you get to where Bishamon was introduced?
I don't remember.
Wow, I did. It's a pretty out there introduction. You'd think it would things pick up a little bit more at that point. So
Okay.
for some people, I think Bishamon and her family getting involved would have done a little bit more. So yeah, it's a little surprising. You're not terribly shonen-y, neither am I.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me, but that's one of those that I do find appealing enough to keep up with. So I was sort of trying to figure out what angles of a shonen-y combat show you enjoy or don't. So okay, so you watched some of Noragami and then pulled it. And then at that point, I think because I had already watched Coyote Ragtime show at the time, my brain was in, humorous sci-fi spaceship antics. So I actually gave you a choice of 2 shows to pick from. So that's the other thing. Two of them, which I believe both had, dubs and broadcasts on. I assume they were Cartoon Network, Adult Swim at some point in the Toonami block, Lost Universe or Outlaw Star.
Yeah, and I went with Outlaw Star.
Any particular reason?
Yeah, actually, back in 2015, 16, in that range, I was working for a European streaming company called Viewster, and one of my jobs with them was to do copywriting. They would tell me what series were being added to the website and I would fill in all the episode descriptions and things of that nature. That was one of my jobs, and one of the series that they added and I had to write about was Outlaw Star. So
Okay.
before you had even recommended it to me, I already knew everything that happened in the series because I had to write about it for Viewster. So I mean, I was already very familiar with what was happening, who the characters were. I hadn't actually watched it, but because I wrote those episode descriptions, I knew vaguely, what was going to happen throughout it. And I remember being really excited about it at the time. At the time when I was writing those episode descriptions, I was thinking, wow, this is a series that I want to watch because it sounds really exciting. So when you pitched it as one of the series that I could watch for this, I kind of jumped at it.
Okay, that's interesting. I know there's enough of it kind of permeates the community anyway, but that's an interesting take. You basically already had the plot outline and enough of it down to be familiar with the structure. You just hadn't actually watched the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I know one of your preferences, at least, is 2000 plus series, and technically, neither of those, both of those, as I recall, were 90 series from 98, but I don't think they were broadcast out here until after 2000. So it's a little bit of a cheat, as it were, but they
Yeah,
definitely
I
would
mean,
have more 90s stylings to them. So
yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that I will only watch series from 2000 and beyond. I don't like to completely limit myself. I prefer those series, but
right.
I'm okay with watching something older if someone thinks that I'm really going to dig on it.
Well, that was more going to be my question is, bearing that in mind, was there anything that, you dug about Outlaw Star or didn't so much or was kind of on the edge as far as art style, animation style? To me, it feels very much of a particular era.
Yeah, I will say one thing right off the bat. The opening theme song kicked ass. That was
Mu-
a really good 90s opening theme song. And it really took me back to some other shows from that era that I watched way back in the day. But yeah, the opening theme song has aged very well. I really liked it. I was really surprised that it's not already on my iPod for some reason. So yeah, so the opening theme song was something that I really liked.
it's definitely very iconic. Specifically the way that it begins, the repetition in the very beginning, it's instantly recognizable. And I found that a little bit after I watched, Coyote Ragtime show. It had a bit of that as well. I could the intro to the OP was one thing. Amusingly, with both of them, I'm not sure the OP went in the direction that I would have, that my brain was wanting with those introductions. So I kind of don't like the middle of them as much as I like the way that they start,
Uh-huh.
which is an odd way to approach an OP. But definitely those first measures of the Outlaw Star one is hitting particular brain engrams and filling one with convenient nostalgic happiness. I'm not sure if you'd heard it prior to actually watching the show. Like, had it ever been something that was just out there and that you'd listen to as
I might have heard it in passing at some point over the years, but it wasn't something that I ever like recognized as, oh, that's the theme from Outlaw Star.
Right.
So yeah, so no, this was the first time that I really like heard it and was like, okay, I am forever gonna recognize this theme song now for the rest of my life.
Yep. No, I can see that. Now, amusingly, before we dig in, since we're on the opening, the ending to Coyote Ragtime show, I'm not sure I would recognize the music for it. That didn't dig in, but that it's, like a stop motion claymation kind of thing. That was definitely a weird sort of ending. I definitely watch that one all the time just because it made me giggle at kind of the general silliness of it. I mean, he's sitting there in a bar smoking a cigar, and it's all stop motion animation as opposed to what you would expect.
Yeah, wow, I haven't thought about that ending like sequence in so long. I'm actually kind of glad you brought that up because, like I said, I had almost completely forgotten about it. But yeah, now I can think back and remember specifically what it looked like.
Fun times.
So, all right. For those who haven't seen Outlaw Star, much like myself, Outlaw Star is basically a sci-fi action series starring a rugged space adventurer named Gene Starwind. And I'm trying to sum up the series as best as I possibly can, but there's a lot of moving parts in this story. So it's one of those stories that feels like if I start describing it, I will have to keep going and going and going.
That's true. It feels kind of like using the phrase hijinks ensue and in over his head. Basically describes episodes 2 through 23 or so.
Yeah, pretty much. And there were, I won't say that I totally disliked the series. It was definitely not really what I was expecting. And I don't mean that in a particularly good or negative way. It was just kind of one of those shows where things kept happening over just every episode. They were just go go go. Something was going on, and every episode there was no downtime. There was no rest periods. It was pretty much, they find Melfina. She joins the crew. There's the race. There's just all this stuff going on throughout the run of the show. So that was interesting, but at the same time, I also felt like because they were so eager and because they wanted to add so much into the action and the story, that I never really got to know the characters all that well, and I found it really hard to care about what was happening to them.
I can see that. I feel a bit like we lost out by losing Hilda and gaining Silent Suzuka. If we kept Hilda in there the whole time, I think it would have been more interesting. I suppose she knew too much, and that's why she had to be detached. But she was there in the beginning, and it feels like if you lost her later as a result of things, but kept her as part of the crew going on, would have been a bit less random.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you do have, thinking about it, this show, I believe, was running congruent with with Cowboy Bebop, at least for one of the seasons. I think they both ran in spring 1998. So it's interesting thinking of the structure of the shows. And it's not like the crew is particularly bigger. It's not like Bebop had a more focused cast. You largely have 5 people instead of 4 people as your primary folks, but there is definitely an element to the slapdash adventures that Bebop crew got in that brought you into the characters a lot more, and Outlaw Star does feel a bit more slapdash.
Yeah, I can see that. Cowboy Bebop was another show that I watched way too late. I again had heard all about it and knew all about what was going on in the story long before I ever sat down to watch it. So I mean, I didn't dislike it again, but it just like Outlaw Star, I think that if I had watched them earlier, I would have enjoyed them a lot
more. Excuse me. Possibly. So you are not one of the Cowboy Bebop 10 out of 10 in top lists best anime ever crowds then.
No, I'm really not.
That's interesting to know, and a decent filter for this kind of thing. Now, the series that's not anime that I mentioned in the beginning, did you watch Firefly at any point when it was airing?
Firefly, I've seen many times.
Okay, so and of course that has both a larger crew, and I think we end up getting way more invested in all of them, and it only played for quote unquote one core.
Yeah.
So it managed to do quite a lot in a period of time. I did find it amusing because I watched that while it was airing, and there wasn't a whole lot of like internetiness going on at the time. But the immediate thing was the introduction of River Song was like, holy crap, he must have watched Outlaw Star. the whole girl in a suitcase.
Yeah, totally.
But so is there one of the sci-fi shows that comes along with this concept that you feel either does it way better or does it best? You obviously think fondly of Coyote Ragtime show, but is that sort of your as far as the fighting, scrapping space family genre? Is that the thing that you would go to, or is there a different series that that has more of that kind of Firefly-like appeal to you?
Thinking on it, I think if I were to choose like a space type series, a space, sci-fi action type series that had Firefly-esque qualities, I would probably point towards Coyote Ragtime Show. Again, I think that part of that is nostalgia factor because I again watched it as it was being released in the US. I'm trying to think of another series that fits that mold better. But
I mean, everyone uses Bebop as the straight parallel. I think Outlaw Star fits reasonably well as well, so it's more handling of the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that.
So, which of the characters did you like best in this case? I do remember at the time that Aisha was very much a living meme even back then. The voice actress, by the way, I don't know if you tend to look it up. I like knowing who voiced what, but that's like Asuka from Evangelion, and the main character from Hyper Police. Another one of those that this feels very much in at home alongside. I don't know if you watched Hyper Police back when.
No, I don't believe I did.
But you can even look up the character design in that case, because it's more kind of catgirling around, which is funny. But
in terms of a favorite character, oh, that's kind of hard.
or that's where we're running into the not getting invested in them. So you don't develop, moe tendencies, protective, personalized feelings towards any of these characters.
Yeah, I mean, the closest that I came to really feeling invested in a character was Melfina. I liked watching her story unravel bit by bit, even though I, again, knew what was going on and knew what her history was. I liked watching it unfold. So that was as close as I came to really actually, liking a character in this series. Jean was just a little too brash. And his sidekick that I don't remember whined way too much.
Don't you mock Jim. He's the best. Or what is it? Ash Ketchum. That's the voice actress did that part. I don't actually know the Japanese role of that part, but I can see the voice fitting it though.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, so this is, like I mentioned earlier, this is another show where had I watched this 10 or 20 years ago, I probably would have liked it a lot more. I don't think it's aged particularly well, particularly in the animation.
Oh my god. I took a number. We're not sharing screenshots or anything, but I took a number of ones that were like, "Oh my god, what's happening here?"
Yeah.
Yes, there was definitely jankiness in things, and you could tell when they were just doing real quick scenes. Some of the characters and keyframes were horrible.
Yeah, and even just basic things like the character designs weren't particularly pleasing. So like Gene, he, it looked very much 90s shonen hero, sci-fi shonen. So yeah, but the animation in particular is where things got a little rocky for me. The story, I think if this series were to be remade, the story would still hold up well. I think the storytelling and the unfolding of the plot would hold up well today. But it would definitely need to have the animation updated.
Yeah, I'm really curious how it went, because it only had it was based on a manga that did come first, and technically it's seinen, but it really doesn't feel it. This feels way too shonen-y to me, and that makes sense. It was Ultra Jump, so those don't necessarily have the most seinen of feels to them. You get a little bit of that with edginess, but it's not even terribly edgy. I'm wondering whether or not you even had the thing for the the youth discovering this on Toonami, being able to discover boobs because you got that in somehow the out of nowhere Hot Springs episode.
Yeah.
Can't believe they threw a Hot Springs. The most ridiculous episode too. Uh, but as I recall, whoever first released it did a bunch of censorship on it. So I imagine you didn't even have that kind of connection to it.
No, I mean, my first pair of anime breasts was from Project A-ko. So
I can see that. I wonder what. I don't think you saw. I mean, I started with Bubblegum Crisis. So literally, like, my first shot of a character was Pris and a panty shot of her getting ready for a concert. I don't recall there being breasts in that, so it may have taken until Venus Wars or Grey Digital Target for that for me. But yeah, no, this is definitely of its time. It's interesting to note which of all of these kind of space operas they all feel largely of a time. We certainly after the 2000s ticked over, we got a whole lot less of it.
Yeah, that's true. It's been a while since we've had a really kind of far out, wacky space adventure.
Space Slayers and Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop all sort of landed at the same time, and that kind of put a capstone in many ways into it in the late 90s. And Bebop has lasted, but it's interesting to see what people take out of Bebop as opposed to Outlaw Star and Lost Universe from the modern perspective. The funny thing though was what is it? Sunrise was doing both Bebop and Outlaw Star, so you literally had multiple teams in the same studio doing the same sort of thing. But I assume one of the reasons why Bebop has lasted is obviously Watanabe directing, the music for it, which of course was, the music and sound design in Bebop is far and away superior. I think the general quality itself was, but you sort of wonder how that went because that was an original, and this one at least had source that it was playing off. You'd think that Outlaw Star would have been the one that they put more attention into, but it's an odd trade-off between them.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder if they were animating Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop in roughly the same studio at roughly the same time. Were there ever any like mix-ups of people accidentally turning in one series work to the other team? For some reason, I'm picturing that in my head.
I think they probably production design was probably reasonably more efficient than handing the wrong animation to the wrong show.
Yeah, it just kind of, I just had that thought pop into my head, and I thought it amused me for a few seconds.
So what then? What then do you think was the most ridiculous aspect of Outlaw Star?
The most ridiculous aspect.
And was it a good thing or a bad thing for you?
The most ridiculous aspect, I think, was basically a tie between all the various moments of Aisha. They put her through the ringer.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so in every episode that something happened to her, like early on when they leave her outside on a planetoid in a spacesuit screaming about wanting to be let back into the ship. That onward, there was just so she was definitely meant to be the comic relief,
Yeah.
but I felt kind of bad for her. So
Right.
I couldn't laugh as much at her moments, but they were definitely probably the most ridiculous aspect. There were lots of ridiculous things in this series.
I thought you were gonna vote grappler arms because that's that's one thing. I think that was the most off-putting thing for me was the way that piracy is handled. Where yeah, I could understand grappling hooks and linking onto a thing and using it to attack their computer systems, but those goddamn arms and the Outlaw Star have deploying grappler arms with a gun and an axe to take things on in combat. I'm like, oh my god, oh my god.
So yeah, I mean, so Outlaw Star is definitely not a show that I'm gonna tell anybody today to go out of their way to go see. I think it had its place in anime history, but it's not, like I mentioned earlier, it hasn't aged particularly
But,
well. So
but
I don't
it's
think that it really. I mean, if someone were to tell me that they consider it a classic, I wouldn't argue with them. I wouldn't agree with them,
right.
but I wouldn't argue with them about it.
Do we know what Mal considers it?
I don't know. On Anime Planet, it's ranked 647. I don't know what Mal sees it as, though.
It's ranked 652nd. It's close. It's almost an 8.0. That
Yeah,
does feel a little
on
high.
Anime Planet, it's ranked 4 stars out of 5.
Well, they're lined up with each other. I guess
Yeah,
there's I guess there's a lot of nostalgia for it. I do wonder how many people have revisited it because that's what it ended up being for me. It's not quite 20 years since, but damn close.
mm-hmm.
And now here's something that occurred to me that might be part of what you felt by just sort of the general hectic nature. A lot of people will bring up pacing as an issue with the series, and they oftentimes mention series with bad pacing and other stuff. Attack on Titan gets mentioned for that. I almost never have an issue with something like pacing. I like slow boil series. I like quick to resolve series. I like ones that kind of spin around a little bit. I'm usually pretty much on board with it. But this feels like one of those where it just came off to the point of being weird and in the end kind of off-putting because I don't know how you have two full core and you're doing a whole bunch of everything and you have the same core cast for most of it and yet somehow the ending still feels rushed. Was that the impression that you got from it as well?
I wouldn't say that. I think the first half suffered from that a lot more than the second half. The first half, I felt it was really frantic, but second half, things moved at a decent rate, I think.
Well, and I'll go into kind of what I mean. Like we get Hazanko and the Anten 7 who appear almost just over halfway in episode 15. They finally show up and it's like, okay, we've had our season of getting to work in with these people. They've accumulated the cast over and over. They've had a few things like the race and like setting up a new thing. They've had that foiling the terrorist plot. They've been working together, and it's like, okay, here are the new enemies who they will be fighting. And you get kind of one thing, they're introduced, and then they have that what is it, that one guy who goes after them directly. but then you don't see them at all. You're back to the McDougalls again. You don't get Hanazono. You get an episode where they're chasing after the Lee line. You've had Professor Khan shows up very late in the process. You meet him in one scene early on, and he comes up later and is like, "Oh, hey, by the way, like I designed the ship and Melfina." So you think everything is going to start rolling into it. He puts her to sleep. He shows command over Melfina. They go in to do a daring prison break of a guy who can get them to the Lee line, and then immediately afterward, your next episode is what is the hot springs one, and I'm like, you're building tension, and then you do the most ridiculous humor filled episode of all of them. You even have one of the what are they, the Anten 7, you even have one of them chasing them around, but it's like a Benny Hill sort of keeps trying to ambush them and then keeps failing weirdly. And I'm like, what are we doing? And you're introducing a new power for Jean to get these these caster shells that haven't even been seen because they're only available from these wacky people over here. But you have to take perverted pictures of the buxom one and bring them back to the perverted one. Like, what are you doing? How do we go between where it starts to pick up and then you have the episode where Jim gets to fall in love with a cute girl and her cats, or you have all of these side adventures still. It feels like a campaign where it was supposed to kick up, but you're still going on 30 hours of side quests instead of going down the main thing. And in the end, the Anten 7 end up kind of being there just for the last 2 episodes to stand in the way. You don't get the story of between Suzuka and, I don't know, what the hell was it? Hitoriga, something like that. There's a particular one who was wearing her face, who, like, in one thing it's like, I killed your family, but hey, you shouldn't care. We're all killers here. Like, get defeated. Same thing. They're all just there to be randomly defeated and killed, as opposed to spooled out over time and be more of a threat. You still had these random threats by other entities rather than the Anten 7 or Hazanko. And then you have this, crazy cyberspace magic filled what is it, Lee line pumped fight at the end to take care of Hazanko. And I'm like, this was such a weird. The second half, I feel, suffered more than the first. I would have almost been happier to just ride around with them for a bit. Whereas once it felt like they were setting in stakes, they then didn't. So
do you think it suffered from not enough episodes, or do you just think that they got lost along the way?
I think it didn't have focus, and part of the reason why I believe you're not invested in the characters is we're not getting backstory. Aisha is a joke character. Gene, I don't even think they explained why he has scars literally everywhere on his body. We get to show that, and it shows off that he's a badass, but you'd think there was a particular story about that. You got the fear of space thing with him and his dad in the beginning, but we didn't find out how he and Jim got together. We didn't find out things that seemed like they should be meaningful, including Suzuka's particular background, why she went into assassination, why she's so good at it, what it cost her. You kind of get it tossed at you from a random direction, and that's what I meant by the ending felt rushed still. It's like, I don't think it needed more episodes, but I think it needed less random and more revelation in the back half to get into that final encounter and make us feel a little more give Aisha more, give Suzuka more, spool out the Anten 7 and use them to connect to other things. Same thing with the McDougals. We keep seeing them back and forth. Harry's like weird love affair with Melfina was fairly out of nowhere. It's like, well, you're another bio construct, therefore I love you, and also I'm crazy and will beat you around. But you surely you can love me as well. I'm like, okay. There wasn't enough connective tissue for the thing that you think pulls a crew together to be a crew. In the end, like the very end scene where you think Aisha and Suzuka aren't going to journey with them, and then they show up there at the end, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to feel happy that they're all together and traveling space again, and I'm kind of like, all right, that it didn't make me feel pleased so much as okay, I still feel like you guys needed more.
I can understand that. I think that makes a lot of sense, actually.
So yeah, I'm trying to remember what particular things. Some of them as well. You have these momentous ending scenes, like between Suzuka and the Anten 7 person with a sudden face reveal, and it's just like, there is a powerful attack, and then I attack you with my powerful attack, and you're dead. And it was like not even interesting. It wasn't a flashy one. There was a distinct lack of Sakuga in these last scenes. Not that I am a Sakuga whore by any stretch, but I'm like you're concluding your big series here. If this is where you're going to put in the flashy shit, well, you didn't do it. We're still getting these fun, spaceship boxing matches, and it's pretty weird.
So yeah, I think that about wraps up my thoughts on Outlaw Star. I think I've hit all the points that I really felt needed to be addressed in my notes. Did you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
Not in particular over this. I was just kind of randomly picking the last nits that came up. I'm sure if we wanted to, with both shows, we could spend another hour nitpicking around. But
oh, absolutely. But yeah,
I think we've done our duty.
Okay, awesome. In that case, let's go ahead and sign off for now. I'd like to thank you for joining me again this month, even though it's been a while since we've recorded. I'm hoping that we can get back into a regular pattern in the near future. So thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and let's see what the next episode brings.
All right, sounds great. In that case, we'll sign off for now. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye, all.